And we begin with that big time game with Michigan going out to Lincoln to play Nebraska. Danny will be there as college football pregame will be live from the Rail Yard in Lincoln, 9 a.m. to 12 if you want to watch it on CBS Sports HQ. Plenty of coverage on Friday as well that you can catch from the crew right there. Damian Harris, Bryant McFadden, Mackenzie Brooks, and Emily Proud, in addition to our quarterback DK. Speaking of quarterbacks, let's not talk about Dylan Raiola, because we mentioned a little bit during our Upon Further Review yesterday about some of what we have seen from Bryce Underwood. So, Tom, from that perspective, knowing the changes and the turnover that we've had for Nebraska's defense, I don't know that we've seen a lot on tape or in action for Nebraska's defense to give us a full understanding of what this team can be. What do you think that matchup looks like when it is Nebraska's defense going up against Bryce Underwood in this Michigan offense?
It's interesting because if we just go to the Cincinnati game, which was clearly, the best
Our
game,
only data point that we can really pull from this.
like Brendan Sorsby did have a lot of success scrambling against this Cornhuskers defense. And if you look at Bryce Underwood so far this year, he is currently tied for 11th nationally among quarterbacks in scramble yards with 96. So will we see Underwood use his legs more in that capacity to pick up yards and keep drives going? Can Nebraska keep him locked in the pocket? Because, and I talked about this on the Monday show, and I wrote about it a little bit too, like part of the success that they had as far as unleashing Underwood against Central Michigan was longer developing pass routes, which then had Underwood waiting longer to get rid of the ball, which then invited more pressure. But for a freshman quarterback, he does a very good job of riding the pocket and getting out of the way and staying with his eyes downfield to make those throws. And if you look at Nebraska's defense so far, and this includes like the games against teams that, were not exactly hard to play, they don't get a whole lot of pressure. But it hasn't impacted them because they're still not allowing big plays, because to this point they are tackling very well. They are third nationally in missed tackle rate as a defense. Now, how much of that is the opponent and how much of that is just their actual players and their ability to make tackles, we'll find out more as the season goes on, and we'll start finding out this weekend. But my concern for that, as far as on Michigan's side, is Nebraska's done a very good job of limiting big plays. Do we really think Michigan's ready to start going explosives in the passing game? Because, they were able to do it against Central Michigan, but we have seen their receivers for the last, feels like 1,000 years now. They don't have great receivers, and they haven't had them the last couple of years, and they don't have guys who are really making consistently getting open downfield and winning routes that way, and it makes it harder for your quarterbacks to win that way. So it's going to be interesting to see if Michigan's able to get guys open down the field, or if we're going to see them relying much more on the shorter passes and their tight ends over the middle of the field. So that's going to be a key spot to watch as far as that matchup's concerned.
Yeah, we've been talking about Samaj Morgan for reasons good and bad for a long time. He was a return specialist. He's somebody who's very gifted athletically. Elsewhere, your other options are in there. The Indiana transfer, Donovan McCulley, and then Channing Goodwin, a sophomore who's really getting his first real college action at this point. It is not what for teams that are competing for conference championships, college football playoff spots. I think we're used to having a little bit more name recognition when it comes to the pass catchers, and maybe that's being spoiled by it in their own conference, by what we know out of Ohio State, by what we know out of Oregon, by what Penn State went to go get in the transfer portal. They are operators within the offense. They are not, to take our old Barton Simmons fighter pilot bus drivers. They are not fighter pilots of the wide receiver position.
And it's funny because and this was a thought I had last night while watching Monday Night Football, because, Nico Collins makes a great touchdown catch on the very first drive of the game. And it's like, man, Nico Collins has been great in the NFL. It's like, and his numbers were so underwhelming at Michigan. And it's like, I go back and I look, and in his senior year, he had 729 receiving yards. But then I put it in the context. And since 2019, those 729 receiving yards that he had at Michigan were the fourth most by any Michigan receiver. And one of the people that was ahead of him was his teammate that year in 2019, Ronnie Bell, who had 789. So they just haven't had it's been part of the offense, but it's also been a talent thing. It's like they did have those guys. They had Nico Collins, who's ended up a great receiver in the NFL, but in the last 5 years, I mean, they haven't really had them.
So what would we say? Roman,
Roman
maybe?
Wilson's probably the best receiver they've had in the last few years.
That's what I was going to offer. Like, what's like this? If it's like, what's the best card that you've got in this deck that of trading cards you've just opened? I think Roman Wilson would be what I would offer up as my best offering there.
Mhm.
What about for the data point that we have for Michigan? I think is more significant
Yes.
because while Nebraska opened up against Cincinnati on Thursday night in Week 1 in Arrowhead, this Michigan team did have to go into Norman and play an Oklahoma team that has proven to be a formidable foe, both in terms of what John Mateer's been able to do with the new Sooners offense, but also what this Oklahoma defensive front is. So, what do you think is going to be there in terms of like one thing that I look at it for Michigan in this particular spot is you've gone on the road in a hostile environment, you've played a tough game. Before we move over to sort of the Dylan Raiola, Nebraska side of things, I'm not ready to think that Michigan can't handle this environment, especially already knowing that they've done so. They lost the game, but they've at least gone through the motions. There won't be that, there won't be that cold ice bath type scenario of stepping into the stadium.
No, I don't think the environment's going to be too big of a, I mean, that's not to dismiss the environment. Like Nebraska, it's going to be a packed house. It's going to be loud. It's not going to be easy to deal with, but it's not going to be anything they haven't seen because Oklahoma was the same way. So at least they do have that under their belt. So maybe they're able to maybe work out some of the kinks that they had in the first game. You might see the operation look a little better in this one. The difference to me, though, is like obviously Oklahoma's defense is outstanding. We know very blitz heavy. They got a ton of pressure in that game. They put a ton of pressure on everybody. And I mentioned that Nebraska's pass rush has not been about pressuring quarterbacks so much. Like when they just drop everybody back and rush 3 or 4, they're really not getting home. But the other side of that is as far as the offensive line and defensive line are concerned, this Michigan team it's not as good as the teams of recent vintage.
Up
The
to par.
offensive Yeah, I don't think the offensive line is as good as the offensive line has been the last few years, and I really don't think the defensive line is as good as the defensive line has been the last few years. So, it's gonna be really interesting to see that battle because I do feel like in recent seasons, when Michigan would be playing Nebraska, they had a significant advantage in that department on them. I
Mhm.
don't think that advantage is nearly as wide in this year's meeting.
Mm. Okay, so what about the other side? You mentioned Michigan's defensive line and sort of, shocker. We've lost NFL draft pick after NFL draft pick for 2 to 3 years right now. How do you see that group trying to have an impact going up against Dylan Raiola and the Cornhuskers offense?
Well, the good news is they've been good against the run, and that even includes with John Mateer kind of like scrambling and doing John Mateer stuff in the Oklahoma game. They're only allowing 2.6 yards per rush. And if you look at Nebraska's run game, that's important for Michigan because Nebraska has run the ball well from down to down, but they've killed themselves with turnovers. They've actually fumbled the ball 3 times on rushes, which I think is, there's only like 7 teams, I think, who have fumbled more often when running the ball this year than Nebraska. So they have to clean that up. They have to take care of the football. But when they're not fumbling, they've actually been pretty damn effective at moving the ball on the ground. Where I think the bigger problem could be for this Michigan defense is, and here comes the Dylan Raiola stuff. Like he's not pushing the ball down the field much, but
Oh yeah.
he's completing a very high rate of his passes. Nebraska is 4th in passing EPA per dropback in the country so far. And again, we have to once again bring up the fact that 2 of their games have been against nobodies, and they weren't nearly as good against Cincinnati. They're also 24th in explosive pass rate. So that's good. But the key to it has been in pass protection. Nebraska's offensive line has been great. They've been 6th in pressure allowed, and they've been 1st in the time to pressure. Like they're holding up for over 3 seconds before they give up the pressure when they do. So that typically implies that when they do give up pressure, it's more on the QB than it has been the offensive line. And when it comes to this Michigan team, as I just mentioned, I'm not as in love with their current defensive line because Michigan to this point has not really done a very good job of generating any pressure when they don't blitz. Now, some of that is it's not a problem in that, with Martindale, they tend to be blitz heavy as it is, so it's part of the scheme. It's just last year they had such a strong defensive line that even when they didn't blitz, they were still able to put pressure on opposing quarterbacks. That has not been there this year. I mean, part of that we could say was, Barham not playing for a half against Oklahoma and then missing part of the game against New Mexico too. But just overall, when they're only rushing 3 or 4, they're not really getting home. So Michigan might feel the need to blitz more in this game than even they typically do, or it could prove to be that Nebraska's offensive line is a mirage that's only taken advantage of bad teams. We don't know that for sure. What we do know is that while he's not bad compared to other quarterbacks, Rail is much worse when he's blitzed and when he's pressured. Like against the blitz, all of his numbers pretty much drop across the board, which is standard. And they are still higher than a lot of guys. But what really changes is he becomes far more likely to turn the ball over when he's blitzed. So if you are the Michigan defense, I do expect that will be a big part of the game plan. You will be bringing blitzes. You will be disguising them. You'll be trying to confuse everybody before the snap and force Raiola into making mistakes, which he has shown the tendency to do.
And that's over his career, right?
Mm-hmm. Since last year, yes.
Yeah, because again, you played Akron, you played Houston Christian. Those are 8 quarters, and he didn't even play, only 21 pass attempts in the game against Houston Christian. But we've got 8 touchdowns, no interceptions so far through 3 games of work. He is in a, in the upper quartile in terms of completion percentage, kind of middle of the road in terms of yards per attempt. He did not explode against Cincinnati, right? I mean, that was when you were looking at it like, man, Dana's got him throwing a lot, but not exactly pushing that thing 20 plus yards down the field. The games and the game scripts have been very, very different in the last 2 weeks. That's going to be definitely something to keep an eye on. Who to you are some of the X factors or the important pieces for Nebraska outside of number 15?
On offense, I would say the most important player would probably be Isaiah Hunter, who is, I think that is somewhere they can like Dane Key, I think is an important part of the pass game, but I think Hunter is the guy that you're going to need to really just kind of, pop some big plays on him. And he's been one of their more effective receivers to this point. Other than that, it's just the offensive line as a whole. Like I mentioned the stats, they've been very good. But Michigan, even if this Michigan defensive line isn't as good as I think it has been, it's probably I would say Dante Corleone at Cincinnati is the best defensive lineman.
There was a comment in the tailgate wondering if Cincinnati's defensive line poses as much a challenge as Michigan's does.
Not overall. I think Dante Corleone does a lot of damage on his own, and then other guys on that line are able to take advantage. I don't think Michigan has a Corleone, but I think across the board, they're better. And I think Barham is very good. And I think that he coming off the edge is going to be a big problem for Nebraska that they have to figure out ways to deal with, whether that's sending another tight end or over there or just chipping in with a running back, which honestly, I don't know if Nebraska really has a running back I trust to take that job, but I don't know. We're going to have to see. They're going to have to figure out ways to slow him down because I think based on what I've seen with my eyes, like if you can take him out of the play as far as like pressuring the QB, I think Michigan has to manufacture other guys to be able to put pressure quarterbacks, whereas Barham's the only guy I feel like capable of doing it on his own.
Thursday, of course, is when we offer our best bets in terms of the Cover 3 Locks pod, but from a wagering angle before we hit a break and turn our attention to a college football playoff elimination game that we got coming up in Bloomington. Is Michigan as a road favorite? Is that something that should make people nervous, or is that some underdog trap right there? Total, anything stand out to you in terms of the wagering angle?
Based on how Bryce Underwood looked against Oklahoma on the road, and again, I think Oklahoma's defense is better than Nebraska's, but based on what you saw in that game and based on what you saw for Michigan's offense overall, in which let's not forget the only touchdown they had in that game came after a muffed punt, so they had a very short field. As far as moving down the field in the hole, they managed 1 field goal. It's pretty difficult to want to take Michigan as a road favorite. Not saying that means you want to take Nebraska.
Right.
I don't know how you could feel confident about taking Michigan as a road favorite based on what you've seen.
Right. All right.